Hello and welcome back to the final panel discussion in today's Future of Work virtual conference. I'm Chris Bishop. Now the topic here is empowering the workforce to harness IoT and big data analytics. A growing number of devices that we interact with are collecting a staggering amount of data. Everything from jet engines to a point of sale device. Now how can we harness the power of big data and make better decisions through predictive algorithms? Let's have a look at the panel. Now joining us now as moderator is Kavita Prag, the Director of the Digital Supply Network and IoT Lead at Deloitte Africa. She is the Supply Chain and Network Operating Lead within Enterprise Technology and Performance. She focuses primarily on digital procurement, supply chain management and smart operations. She also leads the local Internet of Things practice. Peter Malabai, the Managing Director of Internet of Things Africa at Vodacom. His career in telecommunications started at Alcatel in 1999. Peter previously held the position of Managing Director for Industrial and Commercial IoT at BCX and has almost 20 years of experience. Arthur Goldstuck is the CEO of Worldwide Works. He leads research projects and heads up annual studies on internet access, social media and online retail in South Africa. He's also an author, researcher and speaker on technology trends and a former investigative journalist and news editor. Rebecca Enonchong is the founder and CEO of Appstec, a leading global provider of enterprise application solutions with offices on 3 continents. Appstec counts clients in private and public sector across the globe and has done business in more than 50 countries. She is a top female tech founder in Africa.
Welcome back to this final panel of the day. And what a bumper day it has been, I'm sure you'll agree. Our final session looks at the impact of technologies like Internet of Things and big data on the future of work. Digital technologies like IoT and big data are accelerators of innovation and disruption. They can improve efficiency, power new products and services, and enable new business models. They drive high levels of customer satisfaction, but at the same time, they can make your supplier or your competitor or a complete newbie your total competitor. So it is indisputable that any successful enterprise in the future is going to be a digital enterprise. How are leading companies embarking on this journey, and what can we learn from them to actually de-risk our own journeys? Join me in warmly welcoming our panel for today that will share some of their insights and experience in the industry. So Arthur, maybe straight to you first. We've all heard the buzzwords, blockchain, AI, ML. I mean, the acronyms go on. Take out the hype for us and tell us what's real.
Thank you, Kavita. All of those make up the underlying technologies that tends to be described as the fourth industrial revolution, which is a very big part of the South African industrial and technology debate at the moment, high on the agenda, but perhaps more as lip service than as a reality. And part of the reason for that is that all of these technologies get lumped together as if we are on the same trajectory with all of them. That includes related technologies like 3D printing, virtual reality, and robotics, for example. But when you look at each of those individually, you discover that we're at a very varied level of uptake and implementation of each of those technologies. And perhaps the best examples to contrast and to highlight that particular issue are blockchain, IoT, and artificial intelligence. So in our research into the fourth industrial revolution over the last 3 years, we found that on the one end of the scale, blockchain has minimal uptake. Artificial intelligence has a high intended uptake, but still very low actual uptake. And then at the other end of the scale, IoT has massive uptake. And the reasons for those are very simple. The technology and the skills are there for IoT. And also, South Africa is one of the world leaders in fleet management and vehicle recovery technology, which depends heavily on IoT. But at that other end of the scale I mentioned, you have artificial intelligence where there's a very low skills level, and the cost of skills and the cost of training is still very high. So that already highlights what's needed in that particular area. And then you look at blockchain, which has got very powerful applications in tracing and tracking products and goods, but it actually needs a very strong tie into the Internet of Things. So blockchain and IoT, in fact, go hand in hand when you go beyond the world of cryptocurrency and you look at the world of tracking and tracing products.
Thanks, Arthur. So the technology sounds fantastic. Rebecca, you've spent a lot of time on this. In my experience, in journeys we've walked with clients, the conversations evolved over the last couple of years, where it was really about how do we do AI and how do we do cloud, and suddenly it's about where's the value? What are you bringing back to me? How am I increasing profits? How am I reducing costs? What, in your experience, are the game changers in big data?
I think, for one, you have a much deeper understanding of your data, of the information. There's so much data out there. I think that we've been collecting data through various sources. Let's take one example, telecom, right? We have mobile money, which is a real game changer. Why? Because all of a sudden we now see where and how the money is being spent. So this is information that we didn't have available to us when everybody was transacting in cash. You don't know how often the cash has moved from one person to another or from one person to a business. We don't know what type of businesses are receiving money, how much money they're receiving. All of a sudden, this gives us such a much more important picture of how people are spending their money. And this was not available to us. From also, that's from a consumer, business consumer standpoint, but and also government has a lot of use for this, because now they really start to understand, you know, the economy that's not, you know, the unofficial economy, so to speak. But even from a B2B perspective, if you look at business software, you know, all of a sudden we're looking now at predictive and analytics. Why? Because software companies are able to consolidate data that comes from all of their users. So their entire user base, because the information is all in the cloud, they can now understand better, you know, what the trends are. You know, how long is it taking between an invoice and payment? How you know, what's cash flow like for businesses? And based on that, you can make more intelligent decisions.
Right. Thanks, Rebecca. Peter, Arthur's told us that IoT is probably the best scaled of all the technologies currently, and automotive has been around, and it's something that we've embraced without understanding that it is IoT. We've seen the health insurers embrace it in terms of wearables, building that into not only their profitability models, but actually into their customer retention and reward programs. Where else are you starting to see a lot more traction?
Thanks, Kavita. So I think to expand on that, I think you're right to say the automotive industry has continued to lead in terms of the adoption. And I think one trend that we are seeing still in the automotive industry, we are seeing that now there's a lead from just pure telematics into use cases that are applications driven. One being, how then do you offer like internet in the car, where you can offer lifestyle services. But not only that, now you can start to link, because a car in itself collects a lot of data points. So now you can start to collect that data, whereby you are enabling users to interact with you know, the OEM providers, whereby you can start to the car can start to communicate when actually it needs to be serviced, and then you can book it, you know, at a fly from your phone with an app. So we are starting to see that specifically in that industry. In terms of the other industries, what we are seeing, we're seeing traction within the agriculture industry around precision agri. I think the cost point from a connectivity perspective, that barrier is being removed. And then also what we are seeing is that we're seeing that the sensors are starting to become more affordable. And then we're starting to see that different application around how then you optimize yield are starting to scale, especially within the big commercial farmers. So that traction we are seeing. We are also seeing quite interestingly a big traction within the government space as well. From a healthcare perspective, I'll use that as an example. So the traction that we are seeing is that I think one of the challenges that government have been having as an example is to say, how do you manage, for example, your asset? In this case, let's use critical care equipment as an asset that you need to track. You are in a clinic, you run low on specific like pills. How then do you order remotely because then you know that you are in low, and then how then do you track the delivery of that? So that traction we are also seeing. Not only there, I think also the big traction has been more in the, I'll call it the smart metering space around energy management. And now we are studying a big trend moving into water, because you know that water is, one of the scarce resources. So how then do you manage the whole ecosystem so that you can inform planning, because the populations are starting to grow much faster. Then now how are you going to measure all these critical resources so that you can inform better planning? So that is a traction that now we are already seeing, and this is just examples of some of the sectors. But moving forward, I think we are also starting to see that there are going to be use cases. Recently we just launched a digital building ecosystem solutions around how then do you ensure, occupancy planning within buildings, the environment around the building. So those are starting to gain traction, as well as in heavy industry around. I think many companies now are faced with a specific challenge around how do you increase, because the economy is global, and then you're gonna win in terms of how you can maximize the productivity at the back of the investment. And we know that we no longer see big investments going into other sectors. So we're gonna start to rely on technology to augment how you can maximize on productivity. So we're starting to see concepts like connected worker that are starting to take effect. And yeah, it's quite interesting because you can see that there's a huge opportunity in the continent to leverage technology to take us forward, moving forward.
Thanks, Peter. And I'm very heartened about the fact that we're not just seeing private sector starting to invest in IoT, that it's really government starting to embrace it as core service delivery technology. And I'm hoping that some of the challenges we have around water and power infrastructure will be readily addressed by IoT. Now, listening to you, Vodacom's a communications company, and there's multiple pieces in this IoT value chain. So it's very much an ecosystem game. What is your approach in terms of the ecosystem? You've recently made some acquisitions that bolster your capability. Is it your view to then continue to acquire, or you're going to continue to an ecosystem approach? What does that value chain look like for you?
No, I think thanks for that. I think it's a good question, because it's how the ecosystem comes together. I think traditionally, if I start at the bottom, I think IoT has been driven more traditionally from a machine-to-machine perspective, which is more at the connectivity layer, right? But then what's happening is that as devices get smart, whereby you can put intelligence, what we are seeing a plethora of devices that are entering the market. So in that layer, what you'll see more of an agnostic approach around different sensors can start to communicate. A fridge has a sensor, it can communicate. A meter has a smart meter, it can communicate, right? So now you've got different sensors that are becoming intelligent in terms of they can communicate their status, right? And many players are already playing into that space. Then the next layer, which is where traditionally as a Vodacom we've played even globally and being a market leader around that, is more at the connectivity layer. But even that layer is evolving, because traditionally you started with a 2G network, moving to 3G and moving to 4G, and now moving into 5G, and also moving into narrowband IoT as another way of communicating, and other technologies like Wi-Fi. Then the next layer, now you've got different gateway providers in terms of then how do you harness the data from the device through connectivity into a gateway, so that then you can get the data into an IoT platform, which will be hosted in a hypercloud kind of an infrastructure. So that layer is going up the value chain. But now when you are now sitting in an IoT platform, Now you have a couple of challenges now is around how do you store the data? So it talks to cloud storage. And how do you compute? Because you're collecting a lot of data points. And then in there, then you'll see that the different hypercloud strategies come to start playing an impact around AWS, Azure, and others. Then after that, then you move up to say, fine, if I have now the device and I've got the connectivity, I've got the gateway, I've got the platform is sitting on the cloud, I've got a lot of data, then what is the application? What is the use case? What do I do? And the use cases now start to be now industry and focus. So a simple use case is what I was talking about. It could be in the metering environment to saying, what are the pulses that I need to monitor around energy management? And then now out of that, you can start to draw what insights coming out of that data to generate different reports that can be used for planning and all those type of things. And at that layer now, you start to now also integrate into other third-party systems like ERP systems, right? So the point is that it's a value chain which brings all of these things together. And I think it's very key to understand to say, I think from a Vodacom perspective, our approach is to say within the value chain, there are certain parts of the value chain that are key for us to own. And then the acquisitions that we've been making have been informed by that. The recent one being IoT.next, playing at the edge to say, how do you normalize the data? But not only that, saying to say, in what industries are we building depth of know-how? But also we recognize that this is an open collaborative ecosystem, meaning that our strategy is to partner vertically because you need all partners to work together in terms of pulling the ecosystem together. Then further on, what it does is to say, you'll find that in other corporates, especially the big ones, what they will do is that they will choose to say, fine, we'll build our own in-house capabilities so that then we can build our own applications. So that's why you'll see big corporates having chief digital officers, data scientist teams. Then in that way, they can build their own use cases and application on top of this current ecosystem. So we are taking an ecosystem approach and we'll continue to, where we believe we can own a specific IP to own that, but also work together with ecosystem partners because that's how we are going to deliver value to the different clients that are there in the market.
Thanks, Peter. Arthur, I want to change tracks a little bit here. So our previous panel was really focused on remote working and what we've all seen the memes, right? So who's driven digital transformation quicker in your company, your CIO, CDO, or coronavirus? So we've all been forced into this new way of work. The bulk of us are actually at home attending this conference. Your company has recently published a study on remote working. Tell us a little bit about that and what you found, which I think some of the results were quite surprising. But I'm also very interested to know, what does this mean then for non-traditional office type of work? Will you see a shift then and an impetus or a catalyst to more hard engineering types of skills becoming remote?
Thank you, Kavita. It was a fascinating study. We worked with Cisco Systems to get a sense of how the culture of work had changed. And we did certainly come up with startling findings in quite a few categories. The first one I want to mention is that we looked at the success factors for remote working. And there were 3 real critical success factors, not all of them to do with technology. In fact, the single biggest one was the ability of managers to delegate tasks effectively to people working remotely. Now, that's got to do with corporate culture. It's not about the technology you use. The second one was about whether staff were allowed to spend time with children during the workday. So if they had children underfoot who weren't able to go to school during lockdown, for example, and they were allowed to attend to those children when necessary, that was a major factor. So again, it had nothing to do with technology. But the third key factor there was whether they had good connectivity at home. So those became the hygiene factors. And when you have hygiene factors, you're really talking about elements that you can't do without. It's not even whether you are going to transform into those areas. It's simply got to be the background. So that was the first fascinating set of findings, which we put together under the category of what we called happy home, happy worker. So it's critical that the home environment be conducive to working in that way. The future of work is going to certainly require a strong emphasis on that. But the second fascinating category of findings was the impact of digital transformation on productivity. So you do expect some companies to become more productive and others obviously to become less productive when people are working remotely. But there was two very startling statistics that highlighted the impact of digital transformation on productivity. The first was those organizations that weren't digitally transformed or that hadn't started on that journey. Only 29% of those had increased productivity. When we looked at those that were fully digitally transformed, 70%, that's a massive gap, 70% had improved or increased productivity. So that instantly tells you that being digitally transformed is also a major factor in productivity from anywhere. And then the third factor, which ties into the theme of this panel around IoT, we looked at the impact of digital transformation on the ability of organizations to survive and thrive during the COVID-19 crisis. What impact did digital transformation actually have, not on productivity, but simply on business continuity, business activity, and the like. And overall, 56% of respondents said it had a high impact on their ability to continue operating. But then we looked at different industry sectors to see how it had affected them. And we found that the sector where they had the highest level of that high impact was logistics and distribution. So compared to the 56% average across sectors, they had a 73% level of high impact on the ability to continue operating. And that obviously tells you a lot about those organizations that thrived when, for example, the retail value chain came under massive pressure. And you can relate this also to the share price performance of organizations that are digitally transformed. You simply have to look at the graphs of year-to-date performance of almost any organization, and you can tell which were digitally transformed and which weren't. And then coming down to the retail sector, for example, where you have seen a wide variety of different results being reported, you can also get a sense of which of those retailers were digitally transformed and which weren't. But then you extend that to the logistics and distribution side, and you can see that it's a sector that, were it digitally transformed, would have thrived, and where it wasn't transformed, it would have suffered severely. So once you apply logic to that, you can see why that would have been the case. But then you look at the other end of the scale again, of the sector that had the worst impact or the lowest level of high impact on its ability to continue, and that, probably not surprisingly once one says it, is the health sector. And that's obviously the sector that was at the heart of the crisis. But what it highlights is the fact that it's a very untransformed sector. And I'm sure Peter will tell you that it's an area where IoT will play a massive role in future in terms of monitoring, not just patients, but equipment and the like, and giving an instant dashboard of what's happening in a particular health environment. And what we're going to see now in the coming weeks with the launch of a tracking application for contact tracing, in particular in South Africa, is that IoT becomes very personal in this country and becomes central to the health sector. So if we were to ask that same kind of question in 2 or 3 years' time, I think you'd have a very different result.
It's fascinating that, as technology evangelists, we're always preaching that digital equals sustainability. And it's really amazing that the data is actually bearing that out as a truth.
Exactly.
What it also, I think, is going to shift is the way in which we recruit for skills, right? Because you are now no longer limited to a geographic location or let alone a country. You can now source across continents. And I think that while that's a threat for local employment, it's also equally an opportunity for us from a skills development perspective. Your thoughts?
I think we're going to see the emphasis on skills for the future, and digital skills in particular, suddenly coming into the education sector in a massive way. So we've had lip service paid to that idea for many years. In fact, there was a framework put out by the then Department of Education in around 2007 that showed the shift from the old style curriculum to a new curriculum that would be based on IT skills. But even then, their thinking was very old school. They tried to impose, for example, a specific programming language on teaching coding in schools. And not surprisingly, it fell completely flat. Some private schools and certain forward-thinking government schools have taken up that particular mission. But where we sit today, we can see when lockdown began, the extent to which most schools were not ready for a digital future. And even those schools that did then employ remote working, you can see that many of their teachers are not ready or were not ready at the beginning. And even now, many of them still resist and resent having to teach in this digital format because it makes them more answerable, it makes them more visible, and their flaws or perhaps their lack of application of what they themselves ought to have learned about teaching is suddenly highlighted. So you can see why many old style teachers and some of the newer ones also tend to resist digital transformation, but it has to come to the school environment. And that's where the skills base of the future has to start being built. Now, when we look at the dramatic impact that artificial intelligence will make across all areas of the fourth industrial revolution in the coming decade, it's very clear that there has to be a massive emphasis on skills training for AI, for artificial intelligence. It has to start at the school level, and it has to begin in primary school, where basic coding becomes part of the curriculum in the same way that today it's arithmetic. Arithmetic has to become coding. And it's not that complex when you look at very basic coding. It can be taught at that level, so that when learners or students emerge from school and go into the university or the tertiary or the work environment, they actually have a basis for taking that knowledge further and being able to skill themselves for whatever the job world demands. Peter mentioned earlier a key word, integration. It's not just the integration of technology, but integration of skills into what the world of technology and the world of work will demand. We need to have, again, to use a word that he used, the ecosystem for skills, and coding and AI are critical elements of that ecosystem.
Arthur, so one of the critical areas I think as well that needs to be included in the school curriculum is that of entrepreneurship. And Rebecca, you are no stranger to that. You started your first business at 15 and has grown from strength to strength. So tell us, I mean, as a young, energetic entrepreneur in the tech space, what did your journey look like, and what were some of the challenges that you faced?
Thank you for the young part. I'm not sure I'm so young anymore, but definitely, I think I did start working at 15, but I didn't start, it wasn't my own business. I was actually working for somebody. But yeah, I think that as an African Black woman, we have unique challenges, especially in the tech space. I think people don't necessarily see us as credible. So when the image of a successful entrepreneur, is in somebody's mind, a tech entrepreneur, they see, Mark Zuckerberg, they see a white male. And I think that breaking that image, so that at least our young people today, when they try to picture success, they start looking at people that look like me. And so I think that's one of the challenges. It's really a perception issue. When as a business, I started my company Appstec in 1999, and some of our bills were multi-million dollars, and people didn't want to believe that Appstec was my company. And so I let them not believe that it was my company. If it makes you happy to think it's somebody else's, that's fine, just pay your bill. But I think that is one of the challenges in entrepreneurship. But really to really tie this into what we're doing now, I think one of the things that I've tried to do is to try to make it easier for the next generation. And one of the ways that we've done that is through technology hubs. So actual locations where young people, entrepreneurs can come to learn how to better build their business. You know, they have all these wonderful ideas and they don't have the resources to make those ideas happen. And as we're talking about IoT, you know, we've developed over the last few years, not just general technology hubs, but actual maker spaces. You know, we have Gearbox in Nairobi that's a pioneer. They've been doing it for many, many years. But other locations, other hubs are specializing in being maker spaces, taking IoT, taking AI, taking and try to build, you know, robotics, trying to build actual technology using the tools. I know that Active Spaces in Cameroon has recently opened a makerspace, which will help build some of these technologies. We also have a young entrepreneur that has started a company in Cameroon called Skyview, which is using drones and scanner technology to, you know, for instance, for insurance claims, so that instead of having to physically go to the location, they can map out and see exactly what the you know, where the incident is at a distance. Look, you know, and so all of these technologies are becoming really relevant, especially today, you know, where travel is not so simple. Being able to get there through technology is very useful.
Rebecca, so you know, I'm listening to you describe African examples, so African solutions for African problems, and it's often that we import them. And I mean, the unicorns of this world tend to come from outside of Africa. And I remember looking at Zipline, which does the drone delivery for blood services, and thinking, you know, it's such a typical African problem. We're going to have it all over the place, but the solution came from outside, and it's really gratifying to see these hubs start to form and create new innovation. Do you feel, though, that governments are doing enough to support these initiatives across the continent? And are we pulling together as a whole, or does it tend to be more nationalistic?
No, I mean, governments are pulling their weight. I think the most important thing government needs to do in the area of technology is stay away and not regulate. I think that their reflex is always to organize and regulate versus letting technology. Where they can be very helpful is in acquiring locally built technology, which they're not doing. You know, a lot of times when governments have large projects, they call on international companies, or, you know, I think that one example of this is on digital ID. ID is so critical these days for, you know, Africans don't even have, so many of them don't even have an identity. And so creating digital identity solutions is critical. And we do have locally built solutions. We have solutions that were built in Ghana, that were built in Senegal, using facial recognition technology. You know, why aren't governments looking at those technologies to acquire them? You know, they're really going to foreign companies, Indian companies, Chinese companies to get this technology. And so we won't own it. And I think that it's critical for us to build, as Arthur was saying, we need to make sure that we have those skills, those AI skills built locally. And it does start very, very early with our children. At least, you know, let them understand the concepts, you know, of AI. And you know, we do have people that have been working on, you know, trying to build curriculum for Africans, that have been trying to build curriculum to simplify the understanding of the concepts of AI, using fruits, for instance, you know, citrus, what is citrus? Explaining it that way. And so I think it's really critical that if government is going to do something, that they should support these initiatives and buy from Africans. such a problem. We have a great solution for transport, and that kind of predicts accidents and notifies for accidents using just the mobile phone, and can notify authorities for accidents in Cameroon. And it's an award-winning application. But when the government wanted an application, they actually went outside of the country, spent $700,000 on somebody else's technology. And so this entrepreneur that's actually local and that's hiring local staff, and it is actually also developing those skills that are critical for the future, developing them in the country, didn't get the contract. And I think that that's really where government can buy local as much as you can.
So I'm going to use that as a good segue to pick on Peter. Peter, I know Vodacom really does take its enterprise development very seriously. And you've spoken to us about your ecosystem approach. Tell us a little bit more about that. I think there's also then just downstream a lot more opportunity for us to then create manufacturing and production capability from a sensor capability perspective, whether it's components or otherwise, as well as then the service industry around that. What is Vodacom doing in that respect?
Yeah, I think I'll answer that in a number of dimensions. So I think that the point around government playing a key role in terms of enabling the ecosystem is a valid point. I mean, just to give you a sense, so the subsidiaries that we own at Vodacom are South African-based companies. So it shows that we believe in the continent and solutions that are developed from here. And what would be of interest to you is to say, because we're part of Vodafone Group, we take the solutions, we validate them in our market in South Africa. And actually what we're doing now, we're starting to export local solutions into the overall Vodafone market. So there's one strategy in terms of what we do. So this strategy is not only going to be limited only to the subsidiaries, but it's also going to expand to solutions that we are curating with local partners. I mean, to give you a sense, during COVID, we worked with a locally based South African company to re-platform an admissions platform for government around education, which we launched. So there's a big drive in terms of driving localization. But to expand on that, I think what is very key, especially for small businesses, is a number of things. I think one, clarity on understanding where you play in the value chain is very, very critical. So I see a lot of opportunity now, whereby with government as an example, and also private sector companies that have a set aside of spend to push small and medium enterprises, it creates an opportunity for us to create a space for the small businesses to start to get experience. And then, so there's a lot of implementation work as an example that is required in the execution of some of the big projects, and some is actually mandated by the clients, and we are very supportive of that. And then two, most of the solutions that you start to deploy, we need to wrap them around as many services offering, which come with first line of support, right? But depending on the industry, you will find that it's not everybody who will be suited into that. Like another example is to say, let's take an example. You've got electricians, you've got plumbing companies today, right? They carry on and do their normal work, right? But now, the more you start to move more into smart metering, the more you start to move into geyser monitoring, smart geysers, whereby a geyser is going to start to tell you that I'm about to burst, then call in a plumber to come in. So it means people need to start to think around how then do I diversify and play. And we are very supportive of that. Actually, we are partnering with our governance structures around how do we create a strong database of SMEs that can start to participate and gain the skills. On the other side, which is I think what Rebecca is more passionate about, on the application side, I think that for me is quite interesting in the sense that we are seeing more and more companies that they start in the AI world, if that makes sense, or they start in the application world. And what we see is that there's an intersection point between corporate and small businesses around go-to-market, because the ecosystem for it to be sustainable and grow, it needs to be collaborative. A big corporate, we are not going to have all the answers, but then what we'll have the scale, and this is where the scale comes. So the scale of access to market, which is validated from like the role that a Vodacom can play, and then also the access that a Vodacom can provide for the small players into the rest of the continent, and also expose some of the solutions into international markets. And some of the barriers I think have been addressed. So one barrier you could say is connectivity. So we are able to give a connectivity offering. We have cloud capabilities in AWS and Azure, who are also starting to give free sort of licenses for people to build applications. And then what then we can do, then we start to partner with the small businesses around go-to-market, whereby we take the application and we package it as an offering and take it to market. So we are big on like focusing on that and actually supporting that in the market. And I think for us, the way we look at the ecosystem moving forward, that's our mindset. We see it as a collaborative, and more I see small businesses that are going to start to participate, because the IP of building the application, that's where it's going to come from. But then I think the big infrastructure capability is already in place. And I think we look forward to, partnering with companies like what Rebecca has shared in terms of taking to market. And more and more, we are also starting to see venture companies starting to approach us with new IP that they've built. And what we're doing, we are building models around joint go-to-market, so that then we can give the SME the skill that they need. Further to that, what we are doing as well with IoT.next, which is an IoT platform that we've acquired, they are also starting to work on how then do we build a developer portal on top of their platform, so that then it becomes easy for developers to attach their applications on top of the platform. And then this gives them access to a go-to-market line base that a Vodafone can enable for them.
Thanks, Peter. It really is quite heartening to see that the amount of work that goes into this. I think at some level, we do need to start aggregating this at an industry level so that we can get true scale and pivot these businesses to more global SMEs. So we could talk a lot, and we've covered a fair amount of detail today, and the time's kind of run away with us. So I'm going to go into some closing comments. Just your sense, if you were looking at, we've touched so many topics today. We've looked at how companies can embark on this journey. We've looked at skills. We've looked at small businesses. If we were starting this journey, and whether it is a huge corporate or a small business, what would your advice be to a company? Arthur, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I think the single most important factor is to look at how you can use existing platforms to be able to scale up your own operations. So you certainly need to be innovative in what you yourself are doing in your core business, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to, for example, using cloud-based platforms. And the fascinating thing about cloud platforms like AWS and Microsoft Azure is how many features and functions are available on those platforms for anyone to leverage. And in fact, a startup today doesn't have to depend on venture capital to enable it to access all of these advanced technologies. They're there to rent by the hour, basically.
Thank you. Rebecca?
I'd say if you have innovation, if you have an idea and you don't know how to take it to the next level, join a hub, become a member of a tech hub. We have hubs in almost every country on the continent right now. Afrolabs, which is a network of technology hubs, has over 220 members in 47 countries, and over 80 cities. And so join one of those hubs. They will help you. They will support you. Most of the programs, I would say, the large majority of the programs are completely free to entrepreneurs. These are nonprofits that are here to support you in building your business and taking it to another level, connecting you to investors, and to make sure that once you have a real business, a real product and a real business, that you can get the required funding to move forward. So I really suggest you can go to Afrolabs.com and look at the list of hubs that are members, and in there you can look at the one that's closest to you. But I think really that's what I would suggest. I wish I had those resources available to me when I was starting my business. There's so many mistakes that I would have avoided had I had more guidance. And so some of us that have been in it for a long time are giving our guidance, but through the hubs. And I really, suggest that that's the way to go.
Lovely. And just judging by some of, I've had a quick squiz through at the chat line attached to the broadcast. I think you're going to get a few connections come through.
I hope so. I hope so.
Peter.
Yeah, I think some few thoughts there. I think I'll touch on that from a corporate perspective. I think embarking on a digital transformation chain. I think for me, what's critical is absolute clarity on the problem statement, clarity on the ROI, and then clarity on the business case supporting that. I think that's where it starts and that's where it fails. I don't think technology, to what Arthur is saying, is still a barrier, but I think the key is to make sure that you can attach the problem, and then the technology is just there to help you validate that. And start small, start with known problem statements that are easy to solve, to validate, to build confidence around what tech can deliver, or confidence around the results that can be produced. Because when you do that, then it becomes easy to scale, because you validated, fail fast, fail forward. Then at the end of that, then you can start to tackle more complex solutions. But what you will find is to say, if you follow this type of a model, you will find that the savings that you get or the new revenue streams that you get are going to actually fund your roadmap. Then in that way, then you're going to start to marry how you are evolving your business moving forward, and then how you're starting to leverage your technology the best way to deliver on the outcomes of the business. And that is the key message in terms of start small, validate, be driven from an outcomes perspective, because that's what IoT and big data are meant to deliver.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to use this opportunity to pull a question from the chat line that it's talked specifically to healthcare and investments in IoT in healthcare. And I think you've addressed a little bit about that. But what it does ask at the tail end of the question is the land of milk and honey, which is 5G, which is supposed to solve all our problems. How do you see that evolving from an African perspective?
Yeah, look, I think I'll touch on that. I think you would know, like right now, I think in South Africa, we're grateful that during COVID, government granted the mobile operators to roll out 5G. At the back of that, I think we started to have a number of conversations with our key clients in terms of ascertaining the roadmap. But I think what's key is that what 5G will enable from an IoT perspective is around mission critical applications, low latency applications. And I think that's where healthcare starts to have a play at. And those are the things that we are looking into. You'll see that globally, Vodafone, we've started to launch partnerships with some of the global players there around the 5G use cases that we want to deploy. So we are having active discussions with different clients who have seen 5G in their roadmap. But again, it's going to be a strategy of starting with known problem statement. And a typical example of one of the things that we're looking into use cases around video analytics. You look at that, for an example, in mining environments, whereby we are also looking at concept around mobile private networks. And then at a later stage, 5G is going to become a player there, because what mines are looking to do is to say, if I go into autonomous vehicles, you want to make sure, because the latency, the decision needs to be made instant. And what's helping is that, and it's the point that I think was made earlier on, and it's important to understand, is that the computing is moving from the cloud, is moving into the edge. And what 5G is doing is actually bridging that gap. And I think that direction we are starting to see, and I think it's going to have a massive impact in the healthcare industry, because then in that way, you can see that we've got a limitation of specialists. As an example, like in South Africa now, you see that you find doctors flying from Cuba to assist during COVID.
Thanks, Peter.
But now, whereby you're able to, okay, thank you.
Thanks. We're about to run out of time, and I do want to take the time to thank you each personally for such amazing insights. I think we've covered a real spectrum, what could be a very technical discussion. We've grounded in entrepreneurship, skills development, economic growth, and these are the fundamental principles upon which we will build a better continent. I think the audience has been really enriched. I think we'll take a few actions going forward, and I hope that many of you take Rebecca up on her offer for assistance. She seems like a fantastic mentor to have. So I might actually sign up for that myself, Rebecca. Right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Moderator Kavitha Prague and panelists Peter Malabai, Arthur Goldstuck, all from South Africa, and Rebecca Inon Chong, who hails from Cameroon, but she joined us from the United States. Now, next up, we're going to hear from CNBC Africa Director Sid Wahi as he wraps up the day's proceedings with his closing remarks. Welcome, Sid. Sid Wahi is a director for CNBC Africa. He also serves as CEO and executive director of ABN Publishing and is the managing director of CMA Investment Holdings. Sid has spoken at numerous conferences and events on subjects ranging from changes in media consumption habits to doing business in Africa.
Thank you so much, Chris. Oh gosh, what a day it's been. We've had over 2,000 people sign up for this event and attend from over 100 countries. I got to say, it's the first time that I put on a tie since we went into lockdown, and I'm glad to have done so. Let me give you a quick summary of what we achieved today. We started the day on a panel on automation and AI. We looked at some of the trends and applications of these technologies, but we also kind of went into whether it's a technology that needs to be feared or embraced. One of the panelists actually said that the digital transformation train has taken off and we best get on it. We next went into a session on cybersecurity, and there were a bunch of new terms I learned about, for example, cryptojacking and ransomware, and more importantly, how do you prevent some of these threats? And one of the panelists made a great comment about you being as strong as your weakest link, and the need for education and understanding how we can secure our digital assets as well as corporate resources. During the panel on cloud and software as a service, we went into what does cloud computing really mean. A lot of times we hear these acronyms and technologies, and as business people, we don't understand them. So we went into a deep dive and really understood and unpacked some of that. Cloud computing seems to be a great equalizer that allows us to fast track innovation, and we went into the reasons behind that. After lunch, we saw the other side of digital transformation, work from home, work from anywhere, pivoting your business model, having authentic brand communications. We also learned of a new kind of SaaS, space as a service, which I thought was quite interesting. During the final panel of the day, the one we just came out of, it was very interesting to hear about different elements and applications of IoT from the automotive and healthcare sectors, the rollout of 5G, and a big thank you to the panelists for delivering what could have been a very technical conversation into jargon that we all understand and appreciate. I want to give a massive shout out to our sponsors, Fortinet, Vodacom Business, and Rockwell Automation. Thank you so much, and thank you to the teams that were behind these sponsors and helping us get all the material and actually making this happen. None of this would have been possible without you. So thank you once again. I want to also thank the CNBC Africa and ABN teams. Guys, this has been a journey. The last 2 months, we've had a lot of sleepless nights. And I just want to say a big thank you and all the effort you've been putting in, and everybody on the team, you know who you are. Thank you once again. Also want to say thank you to our speakers and moderators. Without you, this event would not have been possible. And thank you once again for your time and for the insights that you've given us. Finally, to you, our audience, thank you for tuning in from all over the world. Thank you for your comments and for your interaction. We look forward to hosting you again during round 2 of the Future of Work. Chris, back to you in studio.
Thank you very much, Sid Wahi, and all the speakers and moderators in the audience that joined us today from around the world to look forward to and imagine the next normal of the future of work on Hopin and CNBC Africa. It's been a great and very informative day. From me, Chris Bishop, and the team here at CNBC Africa, it's goodbye.